Wyoming Territory, 1878. The wind carried the scent of pine and gunpowder when the preacher pronounced her a wife. Hazel McCrae stood still beside the man she had just married. Her hands were cold, her breath shallow, her heart pounding like a rabbit's in a snare. The man gripping her fingers was twice her age, and his eyes had no kindness in them. His name was Thomas Rourke, a cattle baron with more land than morals, and she had agreed to marry him because the alternative was worse. He had threatened her father's life. Promised to burn their small homestead to ash, promised to take her younger brother, put him to work on his ranch until he dropped. Hazel's mother had died 2 winters ago. Her father was coughing blood. She could not risk it, so she said yes, out of fear. The wedding was small and fast. A preacher, a witness, and the man who owned the town's debt. Hazel wore her mother's faded blue dress. When it was done, Rourke leaned over and kissed her cheek like he owned her, and Hazel stared straight ahead. That night, as the sun dipped behind the pines, she found herself walking alone through the back alley of the saloon. She just needed a minute, just a minute without someone watching. That was when she saw the boy. He could not have been more than 4 years old, barefoot, dirt on his cheeks, clutching a tin cup. He was crying softly in the shadows, trying not to be seen. "Where's your mama?" Hazel asked, kneeling down. He looked up, wide-eyed. "She ran off, said she'd be back." "That was yesterday." Hazel's chest tightened. "What's your name?" "Elijah." "Where do you live?" He pointed toward the old mining road. "In the wagon, but she left. I waited." Hazel looked around. No one was coming for him. She reached out. "Come with me." She took him to the boarding house, tucked him into a cot in her room, and sat beside him until he slept. That night, she did not go back to her husband. The next morning, she rode out before Rourke could send someone for her. She took her father's old gelding and a single bag. She did not have a plan, only a burning in her chest that said she could not stay. She rode south past Laramie until the trees grew thick and the sky opened wide. Elijah rode wrapped in a wool blanket behind her, head on her back. On the 3rd day, with barely enough coin for feed, she stopped at a small ranch just east of Medicine Bow. The barn was sturdy. The cattle were lean but well fed. She hoped someone kind lived there. She knocked on the door. It opened after a beat and a man stepped out. He was tall. Broad-shouldered, dark hair, sun-creased skin, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. There was something steady in his eyes, like he had seen storms and outlasted everyone. "Yes," he asked. "We need work," Hazel said, "and a place to sleep." His eyes drifted to the small boy behind her legs. "Name's Declan Pierce," he said after a moment. "You can stay on trial a few days. If you work, you stay." "I will," she said. That night, Elijah slept in a pallet of quilts in the corner of the cabin. Declan gave Hazel the bed and took the floor. She offered to switch, but he only shook his head. Hazel lay awake watching the firelight flicker across the log beams. She had not felt safe in a long time. But here, with Elijah breathing softly and Declan silent across the room, she felt something close. The days passed. Hazel worked from sunup, mending fences, feeding stock, scrubbing the cabin floors. Declan watched her at first, quiet, but not unkind. He never asked why she had run, never questioned who Elijah belonged to. One morning, as Hazel poured coffee, he finally spoke. "You are not his mother, no, but you took him." "He had no one." Declan nodded slowly. "That says something." Hazel glanced up. "About what?" "You." They did not speak again of it. That afternoon, while Hazel was fixing the chicken coop, Elijah tripped and cut his hand. The boy wailed, blood running down his fingers. Declan scooped him up, carried him inside, and cleaned the wound as Hazel held his other hand. Later, as Elijah slept curled on the cot, Declan stood at the door with a tin cup in his hand. "You married?" he asked. Hazel froze. She looked down at her hands, the gold band still there, heavy. "Yes," he waited. "I did not want to be," she said softly, "but he threatened my family. My father was sick. I thought if I said yes, I could keep them alive." Declan nodded once. She turned to him. "What would you have done?" He looked at her then, really looked. "I would have done exactly what you did." They stood in silence. Hazel pressed her lips together. "I do not want to be married to him." "You are not," Declan said quietly. "Not anymore." "Not here." That night, she took the ring off and buried it in the dirt behind the cabin. The next days were quieter. Lighter. Elijah followed Declan around, asking about horses and ropes and the names of stars. Declan answered every question. Hazel found herself smiling more. She found her shoulders loosening, her breath coming easier. One evening, while Elijah played with a carved horse Declan had whittled, Declan asked her, "Why did you come here?" Hazel looked out at the mountains. "I thought maybe this was far enough," he nodded. "You can stay. Long as you want." She turned to him. "Even after he comes looking, I will not let him take you." Hazel swallowed. "You do not even know me. I know what fear makes a person do, and I know you are brave enough to leave it." She blinked back the sting in her eyes. "I do not feel brave." Declan stepped closer. "Then let me ask you something." She looked up. "If you were not afraid, what would you choose?" Her breath caught. "I do not know." "Think on it," he said. "Because I think you might." Hazel turned to the window, watching Elijah draw in the dirt. The wind shifted outside, warm and steady, and for the first time since that cold wedding day, she let herself wonder what it would feel like to choose. Really choose, and maybe choose him. The first snow came early that year, brushing the high grass with frost and quieting the land like a held breath. Hazel had never seen Wyoming turn cold so quickly. Clouds pressed low and heavy, and the wind no longer carried the scent of pine, only ice. Inside the cabin, the fire snapped and popped as Declan added a split log to the hearth. Hazel sat at the table, mending a tear in Elijah's shirt while the boy stacked flat river stones in the corner, whispering a story to himself. She had taken to sewing in the evenings, her hands finding rhythm even when her thoughts did not. Declan leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, watching the fire catch. "He's taken to the land," he said, nodding toward Elijah. "Knows which tracks belong to deer. Found a rabbit burrow yesterday." Hazel didn't lift her eyes from the fabric. "He's always watched more than he speaks. My mother used to say that's the mark of someone who'll understand people before they understand themselves." Declan looked at her. "Your mother, she raised you here in Wyoming." Hazel paused mid-stitch. "No, Kansas, near Salina before the blight. We left after the second year of failed crops." He waited. "My father thought the mountain air might help his lungs." "It didn't." Declan walked to the window, pulled back the curtain just enough to glance at the pale sky. "You ever think of going back east?" Hazel rested her needle. "There's no one left there." He turned. "Sometimes it's not the people. Sometimes it's just what the place held." She met his eyes, quiet. "I buried my brother just west of Cheyenne. We ran cattle together before the fever took him. I stayed after because I didn't know what else to do." She folded the shirt neatly. "What made you build here?" Declan stepped away from the window, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck. "I didn't want to keep moving. I'd been to Arizona Territory, up through the Dakotas. Nothing settled in me. But here, sky wide enough I could breathe again." Hazel understood that more than she could say. That night, after Elijah fell asleep curled in blankets, Hazel stepped out onto the porch. The air bit at her skin, but she didn't go back inside. She looked up. The stars had come out, sharp and cold. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Behind her, the door creaked. Declan joined her, arms folded, boots quiet on the wood. "You don't sleep much," he said after a while. She didn't answer. He waited. "I think I keep expecting him to ride in," she said finally. "Like he'll come with 3 men and rifles and say I don't get to choose where I wake up." Declan's jaw shifted. "If he does, I won't let him pass the gate." Hazel turned her face toward him. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I don't." He looked back out over the fields. "But I keep the ones I make." The wind stirred her hair. Declan didn't move. "You asked me what I'd choose if I wasn't afraid," she said quietly. He nodded once. "I still don't know." His voice was low. "You don't have to know yet. I want to." They stood there until the cold pushed them back inside. The next morning, Elijah woke with a cough. Hazel pressed her hand to his forehead and found heat blooming under his skin. She spent the day steeping willow bark, cooling cloths, and keeping him wrapped in warmth. Declan brought in extra wood and left without a word, returning before dusk with a sack of dried horehound and a tin of honey from a trapper downriver. Hazel met him at the door. "You rode all that way." Declan handed her the bundle. "Wasn't far." She opened the tin. "Thank you." He gave a short nod, then crouched beside Elijah, who blinked up at him, glassy-eyed. "You remember the story about the fox with the twisted paw?" Declan asked. The boy nodded faintly. I forgot how it ends. You think you could tell it again? Elijah's voice was rough, but he whispered out the tale one line at a time. Declan listened like every word held weight. Hazel leaned back on her heels, watching them, something pressing and warm behind her ribs. That night, when Elijah finally slept without coughing, Hazel sat by the hearth, hands folded in her lap. Declan poured 2 tin cups of tea and handed her one. She took it without speaking. After a long silence, he said, "You're not who you were when you arrived." She stared into the cup. No, you don't flinch at shadows now." She drank, the tea bitter and sharp with bark and mint. "Every day I'm here, it feels less like running," she said, "and more like staying." He didn't answer. "I know what I want," she said at last. He looked at her. "I want to wake up and not feel hunted. I want Elijah to grow without fear. I want to look at the man across from me and know he sees me for who I am, not what I can give or keep quiet about." Declan set his cup down. "And do you?" She tilted her head. "Do I what? See him?" Hazel's voice was steady. "I do, and I'm not afraid." His shoulders eased, almost imperceptibly. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. He didn't move away. Outside, snow fell soft across the field. And inside the cabin, the space between them closed without force or hurry, just a quiet knowing, earned and steady. By late November, the river slowed with ice and the horse's breath puffed white in the mornings. The cold settled deep in the ground, and with it came a stillness Hazel hadn't known since girlhood, before her mother's coughing fits, before the lean years, before her voice had grown quiet from always weighing consequence. Inside the barn, she rubbed linseed oil into the saddle leather while Declan refitted a shoe on the bay mare. Elijah sat cross-legged on a hay bale, tracing shapes into the frost-dusted wood with a short stick. The boy's fever had passed, leaving behind a pale sheen on his cheeks, but his energy had returned full as ever. "You ever work a team before?" Declan asked without looking up. Hazel ran her rag down the stirrup strap. "I helped my uncle bring in wheat with a pair of Belgians." "That was some years back. She pull like one." He nodded toward the saddle, not quite, but she's steady. Declan straightened, brushing his hands off on his trousers. "I've got a neighbor who needs trees hauled down from his ridge, pays fair. You want to drive, I'll come behind with the chains." Hazel met his eyes. "You think I'm ready to take that on?" "I think you don't ask for easy," he said. They left before sunup the next morning, Elijah bundled beside Hazel on the bench seat of the wagon. The trail climbed through narrow switchbacks, the wheels slipping now and then on the frostbeaten earth, but Hazel kept the reins taut and her posture straight. Declan walked alongside, boots crunching against the ground, axe slung over his shoulder. At the top ridge, the trees stood tall and close, their trunks dark against the snow-laced ground. Hazel stepped down and helped Elijah find a spot in the sun with his whittling stick and a pouch of dried apples. Declan handed her a pair of gloves. "You feel that shaking in your ribs?" She pulled them on. "I do," means you're paying attention. They worked until the light turned thin. Hazel guided the horses while Declan felled the smaller pines, bucked them down, and stacked them in the wagon bed. Elijah hummed low to himself, drawing knots in the dirt. When they reached the bottom trail again, Declan sat beside her. "You ever think about what comes after this winter?" he asked. She kept her eyes ahead. "I think about whether we'll have enough salt pork and if the roof will hold. More than that feels like tempting trouble." He rested his forearms on his knees. "You don't strike me as a woman who hides from what she wants." Hazel's fingers tightened on the reins. "No, but I've learned not to look too far ahead. You still wearing his name?" She didn't answer right away. "No," she said finally, "I'm not." Declan watched the road. "Then you've already chosen something." She turned toward him. "What do you mean, you chose to stop being someone's possession? That's not small." The horses trotted on, steam rising from their flanks. "I still don't know who I am without all that weight," Hazel said. Declan nodded. "Maybe that's the point. You're not finished building her yet." That night, after Elijah had drifted to sleep on the quilt pile with the carved horse in his hand, Hazel stood by the stove, her hands wrapped around a tin cup. Declan sat across the room, mending a broken strap with slow, practiced movements. She watched the way his brow furrowed in concentration, how he tested the stitch with a firm tug before knotting it off. You always work like that, she asked. He looked up. Like what? Like every piece of leather's got a memory worth saving, he shrugged. Things last longer when someone's careful with them. Hazel set her cup down. I don't think anyone's ever looked at me that way. Declan didn't speak at first. I do, he said finally. All the time, her breath caught in her chest. He stood, crossed to where she stood by the stove, and stopped just short of touching her. You don't need to run from anything here, he said. Not him, not your past, not yourself. Hazel's voice was quiet. I don't know how to stop running. You already have. He raised a hand, slow and sure, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Hazel didn't pull away. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like a song half remembered. Inside, the fire cracked low and warm, and Hazel leaned into the space between them, no longer wide, no longer uncertain. I want this, she said. Not out of fear. Declan's voice was steady. Then let it be yours. And this time she did. The days shortened. Snow deepened in the hollows, and the creek behind the cabin froze over in thick panes of dark ice. Hazel wove strips of cloth into Elijah's mittens while he napped, his breath rising slow and even beneath the quilt. She sat by the window where the afternoon light angled low, sewing in silence until Declan returned from the ridge with the last of the cedar they'd hauled down. He leaned his shoulder to the doorframe, not brushing snow from his coat yet. Hazel set the mittens aside. Fence hold, he nodded. Mostly. Elk kicked through near the south bend, but I'll patch it come morning. Hazel stood, brushing her palms on her apron. I'll heat water. Declan stepped into the room and shut the door behind him. Hold a moment, she paused. There's a letter, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. The paper was worn, the edges curled soft, postmark faint. Hazel took it with careful fingers, her name written in steady strokes. She hadn't seen that handwriting in months. She opened it slow, reading once, then again. Her jaw set. Declan watched her, unmoving. Who is it from? My father's cousin, in Rawlins. She says Thomas Rourke came through last week asking questions, claims I stole from him, offers a reward for my return like I'm a lost mare. Declan's voice stayed level. Did she say where he went after, south, toward Fort Bridger? Said he looked thinner, meaner. Declan folded his arms, waiting. Hazel folded the letter into quarters and tucked it into the stove's side, where it blackened and curled. I won't run. I didn't think you would. She turned to him. I need to send word. Tell her not to speak my name again, not to anyone, he nodded. I'll take it down to the post before week's end. Hazel crossed to Elijah's cot and adjusted the edge of his blanket. Her hands lingered on the boy's shoulder. I thought fear would follow me wherever I went, she said. But it doesn't live here, not anymore. Declan stepped beside her, gaze on the sleeping child. You gave him a name worth carrying. That's not something a man like Rourke can take. Hazel looked up. When did you know you wanted this? A place like this? A life like this? It was after my brother died. I went to the Bitterroots trapping, spent 2 years without speaking much. One spring, I saw a grizzly drag her cub across a river, water rising fast. She didn't hesitate, just crossed. Hazel waited, unsure where the story led. I remember thinking she didn't ask if it was worth it. She just chose. They stood quiet a moment. Hazel's voice was low. I've lived most of my life asking if things would be safe, if I could survive them. I never thought to ask if they'd be good. Declan reached out, not rushed, not uncertain. His fingers brushed beneath her chin, tilting her face to his. You don't have to live like that here. Hazel stepped into him, her cheek against his shirt front, her hands curled in the folds of his sleeves. Outside, the wind picked up, tugging at the roofline. Inside, the silence was steady as breath. Later, after Elijah woke and helped Declan split kindling for the night's fire, Hazel stepped outside and made her way to the barn. She climbed into the loft and pulled down a canvas-wrapped bundle from the rafters. Inside was her old ledger, a few scraps of her mother's embroidery thread, and a folded piece of muslin with her initials stitched along the corner. She sat cross-legged and opened the book. Blank pages waited under her fingertips. When Declan found her there, the sun had dipped behind the hills and only the lantern in his hand lit the beams above. You all right? He asked. Hazel turned the page slowly. I think I want to keep a record, not of what I ran from, of what I build. He set the lantern beside her. Then do. She looked up, the light catching the curve of her mouth. You'll be in it, I'd be honored. Hazel picked up her pencil. I won't write like a school teacher, just the truth. That's enough. She dipped her head and began to write, a date, the weather. A boy who'd learned the shape of fox prints in snow. A man who didn't flinch when asked to stay, and a woman who for the first time was done surviving. She was choosing. February came in hard, the kind of cold that crusted the inside of windows come morning and made every breath feel like it had weight. The days passed slow but steady, marked by chores and the rhythm of a life that no longer felt borrowed. Hazel kept track of their days in her ledger now, small entries in her careful hand how many eggs the hens laid. When the last of the salt beef was used, the date Elijah took his first steps across the frozen yard without slipping once. One afternoon, Declan returned from delivering 2 cords of cedar to the widow Rains, his collar turned up against the wind. Hazel was at the stove, lifting a pan of cornmeal biscuits as he stepped in. Elijah was asleep on the cot, a patchwork of hay-stuffed pillows tucked around him. Declan's boots were quiet against the floorboards. She paid you? Hazel asked, brushing flour from her fingers. He nodded, hanging his coat. Not in coin. Gave me a sack of rye flour and a bolt of calico she's had tucked away since her girl married off. Hazel raised an eyebrow. She said what color it was, green, dark as pine needles. Hazel turned back to the stove. I'll make use of it. Declan stepped beside her, fingers brushing the edge of the table. She asked about us, he said. Hazel didn't look up. What did you tell her? That we're building something. She slid the biscuits onto a cloth-lined tin plate. That true? Declan didn't answer right away. He reached out, touched the edge of her sleeve. It is to me. Outside, the wind whistled against the eaves, but inside the cabin was warm quiet, not with absence, but with contentment. By early March, the thaw had begun. Tree branches wept at midday, and the creek behind the cabin started to run again, slow but certain. Elijah spent more time outside, trailing after the hens or lying on his back in the yard, watching the clouds shift. Hazel found herself reaching for Declan's hand without thinking when they walked the fence line. He'd squeeze once, always once, then let go again. It was enough. One morning, Hazel stepped into the barn to find Declan fitting new boards along the stall wall, his hammer paused midair. A letter sat on the feed barrel beside him, opened. She frowned. News, he handed it to her. The seal was unfamiliar. They posted a notice in Cheyenne. Rourke's ranch was sold 2 weeks back, bought up by a timber company based out of Denver. The letters from the county clerk. He remembered your name from the wedding record, thought you should know. Hazel's fingers gripped the paper tighter. He's gone, Declan said. They say he left owing more than he owned. No one's seen him since. Hazel folded the letter with care and placed it on the stall rail. Her breath left her slow. I thought I'd feel relief, she said, but it's quieter than that. Declan tapped a nail into place. Sometimes peace doesn't come like thunder, just a door that doesn't rattle anymore. She watched him for a long moment, her voice steady. I want to marry you. Declan set the hammer down. You sure? I've been sure since you brought Elijah Whorehound and honey when he was sick. Since you let me speak without asking me to explain. Since I saw you listen to the boy like his words were worth the wait. He stepped in close, one hand at her waist. Then we'll do it right, he said. Spring's not far, I'll ride to town for the preacher. Hazel pressed her forehead to his. No church, no crowd, just us. I want it quiet. Declan nodded. Then quiet it'll be. The snow gave way to soft earth just in time for the first wild crocus to bloom behind the shed. They stood beneath the cottonwood near the creek, Elijah holding a handful of sage tied with twine. The preacher from Medicine Bow, a round-shouldered man with kind eyes, spoke the words clear and simple. Hazel wore the green calico. Declan had shaved for the first time in weeks. Elijah grinned through the whole thing, missing a front tooth. When the preacher finished, Declan kissed her, slow and certain. Hazel's fingers curled into his shirt, and the world quieted to a pulse. That night, after Elijah fell asleep with his arms wrapped around the carved horse, Hazel and Declan sat on the porch beneath a sky wide and still. You ever think about what's next? Declan asked. She leaned into him, her head tucked beneath his chin. I don't have to anymore, it's already here. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, palm warm against her side. We'll plant more this spring, she said. Corn, maybe some squash. And Elijah'll need boots soon. Declan kissed the top of her head. We'll do it all. They sat there until the stars came out, not speaking, not needing to. Years passed, but the rhythm never left. Elijah grew into a boy with strong legs and a sharp eye for storm clouds. He ran the fence lines with Declan and learned the names of every bird that nested near the creek. Hazel taught him his letters inside by the stove, and he read aloud from the ledger she'd kept, the one filled with days that mattered. Declan built a second room onto the cabin, then a third. Hazel added a garden behind the barn, and each spring the green came back, same as the sky, same as her breath at dawn, steady, full. They didn't need a town to call them husband and wife. The land knew. The boy knew. They knew. And every evening, when the light turned amber and the trees went dark at the edges, Declan would take Hazel's hand and press a kiss to her palm, quiet and sure, as if to say again, "This is ours. This is home," and it was, always.